Welcome back. Today we are drawing the legendary Bruce Lee. And you are watching Sadiqssolitude. Bruce Lee was a Hong Kong and American actor, director, martial artist, martial arts instructor and philosopher. He was the founder of Jeet Kune Do, a hybrid martial arts philosophy drawing from different combat disciplines that is often credited with paving the way for modern mixed martial arts, MMA. Lee is considered by critics, media, and other martial artists to be the most influential martial artist of all time and a pop culture icon of the 20th century, who bridged the gap between East and West. He is credited with promoting Hong Kong action cinema and helping to change the way Asians were presented in American films. Born in San Francisco and raised in British Hong Kong, Lee was introduced to the Hong Kong film industry as a child actor by his father. However, these were not martial arts films. His early martial arts experience included Wing Chun, trained under Yip Man, Tai Chi, boxing, winning a Hong Kong boxing tournament, and apparently frequent street fighting, neighborhood and rooftop fights. In 1959, Lee, having U.S. citizenship due to his birth, was able to move to Seattle. In 1961, he enrolled in the University of Washington. It was during this time in the United States that he began considering making money by teaching martial arts, even though he aspired to have a career in acting. He opened his first martial arts school, operated out of home in Seattle. After later adding a second school in Oakland, California, he once drew significant attention at the 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships of California by making demonstrations and speaking. He subsequently moved to Los Angeles to teach, where his students included Chuck Norris, Sharon Tate, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. In the 1970s, his Hong Kong and Hollywood-produced films elevated the Hong Kong martial arts films to a new level of popularity and acclaim, sparking a surge of Western interest in Chinese martial arts. The direction and tone of his films dramatically influenced and changed martial arts and martial arts films worldwide. He is noted for his roles in 5 feature-length Hong Kong martial arts films in the early 1970s, Lo Wei's The Big Boss, 1971, and Fist of Fury, 1972, Golden Harvest's The Way of the Dragon, 1972, directed and written by Lee, and Golden Harvest and Warner Brothers' Enter the Dragon, 1973, and The Game of Death, 1978, both directed by Robert Klaus. Lee became an iconic figure known throughout the world, particularly among the Chinese, based upon his portrayal of Chinese nationalism in his films, and among Asian Americans for defying Asian stereotypes. Having initially learned Wing Chun, Tai Chi, boxing, and street fighting, he combined them with other influences from various sources into the spirit of his personal martial arts philosophy, which he dubbed Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. Lee died on July 20, 1973, at age 32. Since his death, Lee has continued to be a prominent influence on modern combat sports, including judo, karate, mixed martial arts, and boxing, as well as modern popular culture, including film, television, comics, animation, and video games. Time named Lee one of the 100 most important people of the 20th century. Bruce Lee's father Lee Hoi Chen was a famous Cantonese opera singer based in Hong Kong. In December 1939, his parents went to Chinatown, San Francisco in California for an international opera tour. He was born there on November 27, 1940, making him a dual Hong Kong and United States citizen by birth. At 4 months old, on April 1941, the Lee family returned to Hong Kong. Soon after, the Lee family experienced unexpected hardships over the next 4 years as Japan, in the midst of World War II, launched a surprise attack on Hong Kong in December 1941 and ruled the city for the next 4 years. Bruce's father, Lee Hoi Chen, was Cantonese, and his mother, Grace Ho, was of Eurasian ancestry. Lee's maternal grandfather was Cantonese, his maternal grandmother was English and his maternal great-uncle, Robert Hodung, was a successful Hong Kong businessman of Dutch, Jewish and Cantonese descent. Lee's first introduction to martial arts was through his father, from whom he learned the fundamentals of Wu-style Tai Chi Chuan. In his teens, Lee became involved in Hong Kong gang conflicts, which led to frequent street fights. The largest influence on Lee's martial arts development was his study of Wing Chun. Lee was 16 years old under the Wing Chun teacher Yip Man, between late 1956 and 1957, after losing to rival gang members. Yip's regular classes generally consisted of the forms practice, chi sa, sticking hands, drills, wooden dummy techniques, and free sparring. There was no set pattern to the classes. 28 other Chinese martial arts styles Lee trained in were Northern Praying Mantis, Southern Praying Mantis, Eagle Claw, Tan Tue, La Han, Mizongyai, Wakung, Monkey, Southern Dragon, Fujian White Crane, Choi Li Fut, Hungar, Choi Gar, Fut Gar, Mok Gar, Yao Kung Moon, Li Gar, and Lao Gar. Need quotation to verify, page needed. Lee was trained in boxing, between 1956 and 1958, by brother Edward, coach of the St. Francis Xavier's college boxing team. Lee went on to win the Hong Kong Schools boxing tournament in 1958, while scoring knockdowns against the previous champion Gary Elms in the final. 16. After moving to the United States, Lee was heavily influenced by heavyweight boxing champion Muhammad Ali, whose footwork he studied and incorporated into his own style in the 1960s. Lee demonstrated his Jeet Kune Do martial arts at the Long Beach International Karate Championships in 1964 and 1968, with the latter having higher quality video footage available. Lee is seen demonstrating quick eye strikes before his opponent can block, and demonstrating the 1-inch punch on several volunteers. He demonstrates chi saw drills while blindfolded against an opponent, probing for weaknesses in his opponent while scoring with punches and takedowns. Lee then participates in a full-contact sparring bout against an opponent, with both wearing leather headgear. Lee is seen implementing his Jeet Kune Do concept of economical motion, using ollie-inspired footwork to keep out of range while counter-attacking with back fists and straight punches. He halts attacks with stop-hit side kicks, and quickly executes several sweeps and head kicks. The opponent repeatedly attempts to attack Lee, but is never able to connect with a clean hit. He once manages to come close with a spin kick, but Lee counters it. The footage was reviewed by Black Belt magazine in 1995, concluding that the action is as fast and furious as anything in Lee's films. It was at the 1964 championships that Lee first met Taekwondo master Jun Gu Ri. While Ri taught Lee the side kick in detail, Lee taught Ri the non-telegraphic punch. Ri learned what he calls the acupunch from Lee and incorporated it into American Taekwondo. The acupunch is a rapid fast punch that is very difficult to block, based on human reaction time. The idea is to finish the execution of the punch before the opponent can complete the brain-to-wrist communication. Lee commonly used the oblique kick, made popular much later in mixed martial arts. It is called the Jeet Tek, stop kick or intercepting kick, in Jeet Kune Do. Lee favored cross-training between different fighting styles, and had a particular interest in grappling. Lee trained with several judo practitioners in Seattle and California, among them Fred Sato, Jesse Glover, Taiki Kimura, Hayward Nishioka and Wally J., as well as Jean LaBelle. Many of his first students were proficient in judo and other arts, and he learned as much as he taught. After befriending LaBelle on the set of The Green Hornet, Lee offered to teach him striking arts in exchange for being taught grappling techniques. LaBelle had been taught catch wrestling by prestigious grapplers Lou Thesz and Ed Lewis, and notable techniques of both judo and catch wrestling can be seen in Lee's Tao of Jeet Kune Do. He also learned grappling moves from Hapkido master Ji Han Jae. According to Glover, Lee only found judo ineffective at the action of getting hold of the opponent. In their first training together, Glover showed Lee an osotogari, which Lee considered not a bad technique, but he disliked that Glover had needed to hold on to Lee. While in Seattle, Lee developed anti-grappling techniques against opponents trying to tackle him or take him to the ground. Glover recalled Lee definitely would not go to the ground if he had the opportunity to get you standing up. Nonetheless, Lee expressed to LaBelle a wish to integrate judo into his fighting style. He incorporated the osotogari into Jeet Kune Do, among other throws, arm locks and chokeholds from judo. Although Lee opined that grappling was of little use in action choreography because it was not visually distinctive, he showcased grappling moves in his own films, such as Way of the Dragon, where his character finishes his opponent Chuck Norris with a neck hold inspired by LaBelle, and Enter the Dragon, whose prologue features Lee submitting his opponent Sammo Hung with an armbar. Game of Death also features Lee and Han Jae exchanging grappling moves, as well as Lee using wrestling against the character played by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Lee was also influenced by the training routine of the Great Gama, an Indian/Pakistani Pelwani wrestling champion known for his grappling strength. Lee incorporated Gama's exercises into his own training routine. Another major influence on Lee was Hong Kong street fighting culture in the form of rooftop fights. In the mid-20th century, soaring crime in Hong Kong, combined with limited Hong Kong police manpower, led to many young Hong Kongers learning martial arts for self-defense. Around the 1960s, there were about 400 martial arts schools in Hong Kong, teaching their own distinctive styles of martial arts. In Hong Kong street fighting culture, there emerged a rooftop fight scene in the 1950s and 1960s, where gangs from rival martial arts schools challenged each other to bare-knuckle fights on Hong Kong's rooftops, in order to avoid crackdowns by British colonial authorities. Lee frequently participated in these Hong Kong rooftop fights. He combined different techniques from different martial arts schools into his own hybrid martial arts style. When Lee returned to Hong Kong in the early 1970s, his reputation as the fastest fist in the East routinely led to locals challenging him to street fights. He sometimes accepted these challenges and engaged in street fights, which led to some criticism from the press portraying him as violent at the time. At 172 centimeters, 5 feet 8 inches, and weighing 64 kilograms, 141 pounds at the time, better source needed, Lee was renowned for his physical fitness and vigor, achieved by using a dedicated fitness regimen to become as strong as possible. After his match with Wong Jackman in 1965, Lee changed his approach toward martial arts training. Lee felt that many martial artists of his time did not spend enough time on physical conditioning. Lee included all elements of total fitness, muscular strength, muscular endurance, cardiovascular endurance, and flexibility. He used traditional bodybuilding techniques to build some muscle mass, though not overdone, as that could decrease speed or flexibility. At the same time, with respect to balance, Lee maintained that mental and spiritual preparation are fundamental to the success of physical training in martial arts skills. In Tao of Jeet Kune Do he wrote, "Training is one of the most neglected phases of athletics. Too much time is given to the development of skill and too little to the development of the individual for participation. JKD, ultimately is not a matter of petty techniques but of highly developed spirituality and physique." According to Linda Lee Cadwell, soon after he moved to the United States, Lee started to take nutrition seriously and developed an interest in health foods, high-protein drinks, and vitamin and mineral supplements. He later concluded that achieving a high-performance body was akin to maintaining the engine of a high-performance automobile. Allegorically, as one could not keep a car running on low-octane fuels, one could not sustain one's body with a steady diet of junk food, and with the wrong fuel, one's body would perform sluggishly or sloppily. Lee avoided baked goods and refined flour, describing them as providing empty calories that did nothing for his body. He was known for being a fan of Asian cuisine for its variety, and often ate meals with a combination of vegetables, rice, and fish. Lee had a dislike for dairy products and as a result, used powdered milk in his diet. Dan Inosanto recalls Lee practiced meditation as the first action on his schedule. Philosophy. While best known as a martial artist, Lee studied drama and Asian and Western philosophy, starting while a student at the University of Washington. He was well-read and had an extensive library dominated by martial arts subjects and philosophical texts. His own books on martial arts and fighting philosophy are known for their philosophical assertions, both inside and outside of martial arts circles. His eclectic philosophy often mirrored his fighting beliefs, though he was quick to claim that his martial arts were solely a metaphor for such teachings. He believed that any knowledge ultimately led to self-knowledge. He said that his chosen method of self-expression was martial arts. His influences include Taoism, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and Buddhism. Lee's philosophy was very much in opposition to the conservative worldview advocated by Confucianism. John Little states that Lee was an atheist. When asked in 1972 about his religious affiliation, he replied, "None whatsoever." When asked if he believed in God, he said, "To be perfectly frank, I really do not." Poetry. Aside from martial arts and philosophy, which focus on the physical aspect and self-consciousness for truths and principles, Lee also wrote poetry that reflected his emotion and a stage in his life collectively. Many forms of art remain concordant with the artist creating them. Lee's principle of self-expression was applied to his poetry as well. His daughter Shannon Lee said, "He did write poetry, he was really the consummate artist." His poetic works were originally handwritten on paper, then later on edited and published, with John Little being the major author, editor, for Bruce Lee's works. Linda Lee Cadwell, Bruce Lee's wife, shared her husband's notes, poems, and experiences with followers. She mentioned Lee's poems are, by American standards, rather dark, reflecting the deeper, less exposed recesses of the human psyche. Most of Bruce Lee's poems are categorized as anti-poetry or fall into a paradox. The mood in his poems shows the side of the man that can be compared with other poets such as Robert Frost, one of many well-known poets expressing himself with dark poetic works. The paradox taken from the yin and yang symbol in martial arts was also integrated into his poetry. His martial arts and philosophy contribute a great part to his poetry. The free verse form of Lee's poetry reflects his famous quote, "Be formless, shapeless, like water." Death. Bruce Lee is buried next to his son Brandon at Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle. On May 10, 1973, Lee collapsed during an automated dialogue replacement session for Enter the Dragon at Golden Harvest Film Studio in Hong Kong. Because he was having seizures and headaches, he was immediately rushed to Hong Kong Baptist Hospital, where doctors diagnosed cerebral edema. They were able to reduce the swelling through the administration of mannitol. The headache and cerebral edema that occurred in his first collapse were later repeated on the day of his death. On Friday, July 20, 1973, Lee was in Hong Kong to have dinner with actor George Lazenby, with whom he intended to make a film. According to Lee's wife Linda, Lee met producer Raymond Chow at 2 p.m. at home to discuss the making of the film Game of Death. They worked until 4 p.m. and then drove together to the home of Lee's colleague Betty Ting Pei, a Taiwanese actress. The three went over the script at Ting's home, and then Chow left to attend a dinner meeting. Later, Lee complained of a headache, and Ting gave him the painkiller Equagesic, which contained both aspirin and the tranquilizer meprobamate. Around 7:30 p.m., he went to lie down for a nap. When Lee did not come for dinner, Chow came to the apartment, but he was unable to wake Lee up. A doctor was summoned, and spent 10 minutes attempting to revive Lee before sending him by ambulance to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Lee was declared dead on arrival at the age of 32. There was no visible external injury, however, according to autopsy reports, Lee's brain had swollen considerably, from 1,400 to 1,575 grams, a 13% increase. The autopsy found Equagesic in his system. On October 15, 2005, Chow stated in an interview that Lee died from an allergic reaction to the tranquilizer meprobamate, the main ingredient in Equagesic, which Chow described as an ingredient commonly used in painkillers. When the doctors announced Lee's death, it was officially ruled a death by misadventure. Lee's wife Linda returned to her hometown of Seattle, and had Lee's body buried in Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle. Pallbearers at Lee's funeral on July 25, 1973, included Taiki Kimura, Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Dan Inosanto, Peter Chin, and Lee's brother Robert. Around the time of Lee's death, numerous rumors appeared in the media. Lee's iconic status and untimely death fed many wild rumors and theories. These included murder involving the triads and a supposed curse on him and his family. Donald Tier, a forensic scientist, recommended by Scotland Yard, who had overseen over 1,000 autopsies, was assigned to the Lee case. His conclusion was death by misadventure, caused by cerebral edema due to a reaction to compounds present in the combination medication equagesic. Although there was initial speculation that cannabis found in Lee's stomach may have contributed to his death, Tier said it would be both irresponsible and irrational to say that cannabis might have triggered either the events of Bruce's collapse on May 10 or his death on July 20. Dr. Artlesson, the clinical pathologist at Queen Elizabeth Hospital, reported at the coroner hearing that the death could not have been caused by cannabis. In a 2018 biography, author Matthew Polly consulted with medical experts and theorized that the cerebral edema that killed Lee had been caused by overexertion and heat stroke. Heat stroke was not considered at the time because it was then a poorly understood condition. Furthermore, Lee had his underarm sweat glands removed in late 1972, in the apparent belief that underarm sweat was unphotogenic on film. Polly further theorized that this caused Lee's body to overheat while practicing in hot temperatures on May 10 and July 20, 1973, resulting in heat stroke that in turn exacerbated the cerebral edema that led to his death. In an article in the December 2022 issue of Clinical Kidney Journal, a team of researchers examined the various theories regarding Lee's cause of death, and concluded that his fatal cerebral edema was brought on by hyponatremia, an insufficient concentration of sodium in the blood. The authors noted that there were several risk factors which predisposed Lee to hyponatremia, including excessive water intake, insufficient solute intake, alcohol consumption, and use or overuse of multiple drugs which impair the ability of the kidneys to excrete excess fluids. Lee's symptoms prior to his death were also found to closely match known cases of fatal hyponatremia. If you are still watching, be sure to like and subscribe. It's free. Now one of the best Bruce Lee quotes. Be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle and it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. Now here's a list of Bruce Lee films, with some spoilers. If you haven't seen them, just mute this part. Game of Death, 1978. This is the flick Bruce Lee fans love to hate. In 1972, Lee filmed 30 minutes of fight scenes for a movie about a yellow jumpsuit hero who battles his way up a 5-story pagoda to retrieve a secret treasure. Lee died before he completed the project, but 5 years later, Golden Harvest Studios unearthed the footage, cut it down to 7 minutes, and stuck it on the end of a creaky plot about a Chinese stuntman who gets shot in the face, gets reconstructive surgery, and takes revenge from beyond the grave. The whole thing is a distasteful mess. The Birth of Mankind, 1946. Lee's father, Hui Chen, was cast in a number of movies, and he would often bring his son on set with him. Bruce climbed the wooden ladders to reach the suspended studio lights. Actress Fong Soper remembers of the hyperactive boy. He wanted to touch everything from the cameras to the sound equipment. One of the directors saw his relentless energy and offered him a part in this Cantonese tearjerker about a runaway who becomes a pickpocket and, gets run over by a truck. A forgettable flick that flopped at the box office. This one's only notable for typecasting young Lee as a wily street urchin with a heart of gold, a kind of artful dodger. Wealth is Like a Dream, 1948. Once again, Lee was cast as a lost boy. His father co-starred in the film and the promoters, seeking to play off the family connection, gave Lee a new stage name, Little Hui Chen. The newspapers followed suit, calling him Wonder Kid. The son would spend the rest of his life determined to outshine his old man. Based on this performance, he had his work cut out for him. Thunderstorm, 1957. Adolescence proved a tricky transition for Lee's career. Too old for the scrappy orphan role, he attempted to play against type and broaden his range with mixed results. His character is proper, naive, dutiful, and rich, and in love with his family's housemaid. Critics panned the movie, singling out his performance as rigid, artificial, and overeager. Mercifully, this was his only attempt to play the refined gentleman. Golden Gate Girl, 1941. Esther Ng was a pioneering female film director who specialized in patriotic war movies. While filming Golden Gate Girl, she needed a newborn girl for several scenes and asked Lee's father if she could borrow his son. In one brief appearance, 2-month-old Lee is rocked to sleep in a wicker bassinet, wearing a lacy bonnet and girl's blouse. His mother was flustered to see her delicate child so transfigured for the camera. In another close-up, a warmly wrapped baby Lee cries inconsolably, eyes squeezed shut, mouth agape, arms flapping, chubby cheeks and double chin reverberating as the sound echoes through San Francisco. The Beginning of Mankind, 1951. In what amounts to a PSA against harsh Confucian parenting, Lee plays a poor kid who, yes, runs away to become a street urchin and petty thief. In real life, Lee and his classmates had formed an actual gang that would roam back alleys looking for fights. That lived experience led to a sharp performance in an otherwise tedious film. We Owe It to Our Children, 1955. In 1953, Lee joined a socialist collective of filmmakers and actors called Union Films, leading him to appear in a string of socially conscious, message-driven movies. In this particularly earnest melodrama, a poor mother and father give away their infant daughter to a childless middle-class couple, only to regret their decision. It was all too common an occurrence in post-war Hong Kong. Jackie Chan's parents considered selling him to a wealthy doctor. In the movie, Lee shows up only briefly as the lazy landlord's son, constantly slicking back his greased hair with a comb like Elvis. A Mother's Tears, 1953. This family drama was once considered one of Lee's lost films until the Hong Kong Film Archives eventually located a scratchy print. But it probably would have been fine if they hadn't, as it's essentially only half a Bruce Lee movie. He plays the role of a thoughtful son before getting replaced halfway through the film by an older actor. A Myriad Homes, 1953. This social realist satire contrasts the family life of a rich businessman with a poor car mechanic who makes an honest living, finding comfort in his family. In a bit of a twist, Lee finally plays a happy, non-urchin child as the mechanic's cheerful son. Blink and you'll miss his grinning face in this largely decorative role. Orphan's Song, 1955. Lee, as the titular orphan, doesn't show up until the last 20 minutes, a long slog through thick gruel for what amounts to a one performance, too passive and diffident to care about. Darling Girl, 1957. Fun fact, Lee was once the cha-cha champion of Hong Kong. Also fun, his real-life dance partner, Margaret Leong, co-stars as a spoiled rich girl in this light-hearted rom-com. Want to see Bruce Lee as a fashionable, sweater-vest-wearing toff as he cha-chas in a nightclub? This is the movie for you. The only bit of acting required on his part is when Leong's love interest angrily confronts him, and instead of engaging, Lee's character flees in terror. It may be the only known instance of Lee running away from a fight. Too Late for Divorce, 1956. This is the third film in a romantic trilogy, beginning with She Says No to Marriage, 1951, and followed by She Says No to Marriage but Now She Says Yes, 1952, about a successful singer who is forced to retire and marry a man she despises. Lee plays her son, a dance tutor. More Bruce Lee dance trivia. Later, as a college student in America, he taught dance classes to help pay the bills. Smartly dressed in modern clothing, charming but a little smug, this performance gives the best glimpse into what Lee was actually like as a westernized teenager in colonial Hong Kong. Sweet Time Together, 1956. A cut up in class, it seemed natural for Lee to try his hand at comedy at some point. He did just that in this age-reversal slapstick farce, playing a doltish teenager who finds himself caught in increasingly absurd romantic situations. Yet the real humor comes from watching the king of kung fu stammering and twitching like a fool. Lee's comedic idol was Jerry Lewis, and he does a credible imitation, down to the white sailor boy outfit and black horn-rimmed glasses. In the Face of Demolition, 1953. After World War II, millions of refugees from China's civil war flooded into the British colony of Hong Kong. This classic film weaves together the stories of the many impoverished families all living in one teeming, soon-to-be-demolished tenement building, with Lee playing the sincere son of one of the poorest tenants. In less than 5 minutes of screen time, he manages to deliver a standout, touching performance in a movie filled with them. An Orphan's Tragedy, 1955. Here Lee gets to play a happy orphan, albeit briefly. His idyllic country life gets disrupted by an escaped criminal who turns out to be his biological father. The scenes where Lee is trapped in a shack with this desperate, violent man are the best of the movie, mostly because it's fun to watch a 15-year-old Bruce Lee try to play weak. The Guiding Light, 1953. In yet another message-driven melodrama, a foster child gets adopted by a doctor and his wife, who run an orphanage for blind girls. When Lee's character grows up, he discovers the cure for blindness. The movie ends with a direct-to-camera plea: every child can be just like him. Poor handicapped children are waiting for your love, for education and nurturing. By this point in his career, Lee had mastered the orphan role, infusing his performance with a heavy dollop of pathos. Love, Part 1 and 2, 1955. Set on board a steamship, this two-part melodrama unfolds in 6 episodes, dealing with 6 different aspects of love. In the 5th storyline, Lee plays the youngest son in a family of struggling street performers. A flashback of father and son performing for a crowd allows Lee, a ham at heart, to display his talent for showmanship. It's utterly charming, and one of the best scenes of Lee's career. Marlowe, 1969. Lee's first Hollywood cameo was a gift from his Oscar-winning kung fu student, Sterling Siliphant, who came up with the character of mob enforcer Winslow Wong for his mentor to play. There are moments when Lee, who was self-conscious about his Chinese accent, comes off as stiff and nervous as he exchanges snappy dialogue with James Garner's Marlowe. But he eventually loosens up during a scene in which he demolishes Marlowe's office in one continuous ballet of directed violence. The movie flopped at the box office and was panned by critics. Roger Ebert reserved his only praise for that action sequence, although he didn't deem Lee important enough to use his name or get his ethnicity right. Somewhere about the time when the Japanese karate expert wrecks his office, in a very funny scene, we realize Marlowe has lost track of the plot, too. The Kid, 1950. Lee landed his first starring role with his 4th film, once again about a tough street urchin with a heart of gold. At just 10 years old, Lee shows off a range of emotions and raw charisma. In one scene, he humorously imitates his teacher. In another, he puffs himself up with cocky bravado by throwing his shoulders back and thumbing his nose at an opponent, one of his signature moves as an adult actor. The movie was a box office hit and a sequel was planned that might have turned Lee into the Macaulay Culkin of Hong Kong, but his father refused to let him repeat the role. Lee was causing trouble in school and getting into fights on the streets, so his parents put him in show business timeout until his behavior improved. It didn't, but they eventually let him continue acting anyway. Fist of Fury, 1972. Lee's second contractual movie with Golden Harvest Studios was his only period piece. He plays Chen Zhen, the student of a famous kung fu master in 1930s colonial Shanghai. When Chen Zhen discovers his master was killed by the Japanese, he unleashes his furious fists. The movie's overt ethno-nationalism was like an adrenaline shot of pure patriotism. Many Chinese fans ripped up their seat cushions and threw them around the theater when Lee's character strutted into the Japanese dojo and declared, "The Chinese are not the sick men of Asia." Interestingly, Lee was a fan of Japanese films, particularly Zatoichi, the Blind Swordsman, and he approached his role with the exaggerated emotional style of Japanese samurai movies, Kambara. It doesn't quite work, but Lee's fight choreography is so riveting it doesn't matter. The Big Boss, 1971. For someone as worldly as Lee, he had a fondness for playing naïfs. In his first Golden Harvest movie, his character immigrates to Thailand to work in an ice factory, which is actually a front for a drug smuggling operation. He was a very simple, straightforward guy. Like if you told him something, he'd believe you, Lee explained. Then, when he finally figures out he's been had, he goes animal. His primal performance is the movie's primary pleasure. He rips through his enemies with lustful glee. Hong Kong audiences were blown away. The Big Boss turned Lee into the biggest star in Southeast Asia. Way of the Dragon, 1972. Lee hoped this Hong Kong movie, which he wrote, directed, and starred in, would be his ticket back to Hollywood as a leading man. Lee plays Tang Lung, a naive bumpkin sent to Rome to protect a Chinese restaurant from the mafia. Well, it is really a simple plot of a country boy going to a place where he cannot speak the language, but somehow he comes out on top, because he honestly and simply expressed himself, Lee laughingly told Esquire, by beating the hell out of everybody who gets in his way. In his directorial debut, Lee was unable to balance the humor of the early fish-out-water scenes with the violence at the end. The film's appeal rests almost entirely on his fight scene with his student, Chuck Norris, arguably the best one ever captured on celluloid. The Orphan, 1960. Lee was never fully comfortable on screen unless he was the star, and he had been waiting 10 years, since The Kid, for a leading role. Modeling his troubled teenage character on James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, Lee gave his most emotionally complex performance as an actor in this film. One moment he is snarling, the next laughing maniacally, and all the while spewing out a fetid stew of Cantonese street slang. Hong Kong boys were so taken with Lee's swaggering hoodlum that they began to emulate how he smoked cigarettes and cha-cha danced, causing one concerned high school principal to hang a banner across his school's entrance reading, "No one is allowed to imitate Bruce Lee's Awesome in the Orphan." Enter the Dragon, 1973. This cheaply made James Bond ripoff was supposed to be Lee's entree into superstardom. Instead, his death a month before its release left at the high water mark of his career. The multiracial cast, the cat-stroking villain, and the tournament structure launched the West's kung fu craze, and 1,000 imitators. Terrified that Warner Brothers would recut the movie to make John Saxon the star, Lee fought on screen and off to stamp his personality onto every frame. The result was a performance so intense he seems to vibrate off the screen. 2 hours of watching Lee punch, kick, and hack his way through dozens of bad guys inspired millions of Western kids to take up the martial arts. Enter the Dragon is the movie that cemented Lee's legacy, in film and beyond. Until next time, take care and do good.